And so, although this is like a mind virus that has infected all of Western culture, I feel like in Canada, we're like on the deathbed because we just don't ever foster or support our cultural needle movers. We just don't.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is Megan Murphy moves to Mexico, goes on Joe Rogan. I guarantee, I can tell you without even knowing that your Canadian readership is smaller probably than other regions in the world. And
yeah,
it shouldn't
more in
be
the
that
US.
way. Of course, me too.
Yeah.
My readership and the people that listen to my podcast, I talk about a lot of Canadian stuff, right? Like I have Sam Cooper on like every 2 weeks to talk about China's influence over Canada. I mean, it's very much a Canadian centered. Those episodes are very much Canadian centered. I would say that the audience skews about 75% American, and then maybe 15% Canadian, and then the rest other places in the world. And I still for the life of me cannot figure out why that is. The only thing that I can think of is because American media has always had such a powerful influence over Canadians that's just the way they operate. So Canadians will go to American media outlets to get news that is kind of somewhat relevant to them. Meanwhile, Megan Murphy is over here talking about the real stuff, and they're not paying enough attention to you just because you're one of their own, right? And so
it's interesting that you say that, because I keep, as I'm sure you do as well, I'll keep looking at Canada and being like, are you guys not paying attention? As, especially, with regards to the gender identity stuff, for example, in the UK, they are shutting down all these gender clinics for kids. They're banning the use of puberty blockers and hormones for kids. And in US, the tides are turning as well. And I think even like the American Pediatric Association came out with a statement recently against medicalizing these kids who are being labeled trans. People are acknowledging that these medications are really harmful and really dangerous and ruins kids' lives. And of course, they're kids, so they can't consent to any of this anyway. But Canada is gung-ho. Like, they are just doubling down. These activists are not doing themselves any favors. They're losing favor, and they either can't see it or they refuse to see it. The politicians are doubling down, with the exception of the Conservative Party now. But the Liberals and the NDP are just like, no, we're doubling down on this. Trans women are women, and we're supporting trans kids, and all these people are not just bigots and hateful, but we're actually going to try to criminalize them now. And I'm like, what planet are you people living on?
Yeah, but again, like that's it's because Canada doesn't live in the real world. We never really have. Right. Prior to Justin Trudeau, if you ask most Canadians who their prime minister was, most wouldn't. However, they knew like the details of Barack Obama's private life. Right. And that's because we view ourselves as being perpetually safe. Right. Because Canada has always been milquetoast. We've always been middle of the road. We're a second tier first world country. Right. And so with Canadians, that's always been our fatal flaw, is apathy toward anything Canadian, any issues that we're faced with. I watched a video today of a guy who's disabled, who's been offered MAID, I think 4 or 5 different times by our federal government. So just to put things in perspective, this guy is severely disabled. He's not being offered the care that he needs by our healthcare system. Instead, on 4 or 5 occasions, they have offered to kill him as an option over getting the care that he needs and deserves, and the care that our taxes pay for. And Canadians are disconnected from this because Canadians don't live in that world. See, what happened to us over the last 10 years is that shit got really, really real, right? But we're in this place where Canadians are still living in the Stephen Harper fantasy, where we don't even know who he is, what his name is. We don't know what he does. We don't even know what party he's from.
Well, and we're terrified, progressives and leftists have not advanced to the present moment and still behave as though the conservatives are some kind of great threat to all that is good in Canada, you know, a threat to women and a threat to immigrants and a threat to the poor and all of these things that are just not true and don't make any sense. And I don't think really did ever make any sense.
Right.
But, you know, particularly now when we've been woken up to the truth about these leftists and progressives who have zero interest in the working class or the poor or the marginalized or people struggling with addiction and mental illness. Certainly they have no interest in supporting women. But, you know, when I talk to feminists from Vancouver that I used to work with, and, you know, my old progressive friends in Vancouver, they're like, oh, well, but not the conservatives. I'm like, why? Or then who?
Yeah. Right.
Just no.
Yeah.
Are you right wing now? Like,
no.
what? No.
No. And
What are you
and see,
talking about?
here's the thing is the thing I always try to remind Canadians is that our conservative party is center left, right? They're like, they're not Republicans. And again, this is the problem, right? This is the disconnect, is that most people pay attention to mainly American media. So they think of conservatives as being Republicans. And the truth is that Canada's conservatives are very much a center-left party. We don't really have a right-wing party, and I don't even know what those people would do if the right wing actually showed up here, right? They'd have a
imagine if
fucking
there was like
meltdown.
a religious right in Canada. They like to say those words. There's no religious right in
Right?
Canada.
No.
That doesn't exist.
And the thing is, like, I wrote about this today, like, you know, when Justin Trudeau says the far right or right-wing extremists, that's code for the working class is what he's actually talking
It's
about,
code for
right?
the convoy, the trucker convoy.
Right. But this is the thing, right? And this is what metropolitan Canadians, this is the dirty secret, because that's what they know. They know what that's code for. They just don't want to say working class, right? And it's part of Canadian politeness, right? We don't say working class. We say far right wing extremist, Nazi, right? Fascist, instead of working class people. Right. And so but that's where we are. And that's the struggle point for us, is that all this stuff is happening in this country. If you talk to people, which I'm sure you do, but, you know, you talk to people in other parts of the world, the first question I always get is, what the fuck is happening in Canada?
Yeah, me too.
Right. And it's like, yeah, it's happening. Like, this is happening. This is happening. Right. And it's like, but you talk to other Canadians and they're like, yeah, but Pierre Poilievre is so mean. He's anti-trans. And it's like, what? But again, going back to the trans issue, right? Like, these people are okay with all this trans policy, this gender affirming care for kids, because in their world, that's not relevant to them. That's not going to happen to them. That doesn't happen to them, right? Nobody in their neighborhood's getting their sexual organs cut off. I had a conversation today with a doctor, just random, not on a podcast, just off the cuff, random conversation. And, you know, what we were talking about was how gender is a social construct, according to them. However, it is also a sexual, it's also the way that you identify from a biological perspective, right? Because if gender is a social construct, then if you're trans, you don't need to remove your anything, because it's just a social construct. You can just construct your identity as you see fit. Right. It's fluid.
Do whatever then.
So then why are they pressuring children to remove their sexual organs? Right? If it's just a social construct, then there should be no need for surgery. Right? Because then you can just choose whatever gender you want to be. But that's the fatal flaw, right? That's the hypocrisy in it all, is that they say, well, no, part of gender affirming care is turning that person into the biological sex of their choosing. Well, then at that point, gender is no longer a social construct, is it? It's physical, scientific reality, right?
Yeah, it's always, I mean, that's always been one of the grand confusions of this whole ideology. And that people will say to me condescendingly, oh, you don't understand the difference between sex and gender. And I'm like, no, you don't understand the difference between sex and gender. I'm talking about sex, because if you talk about gender, it just confuses things, right? I'm talking about biological sex. I'm talking about male or female. I'm talking about material reality or physical body. if you want to talk about gender as a social construct, that's fine. But then it's nothing. It's just your personality or your preferences or the clothes you like to wear or how you like to cut your hair or sure, whatever, how you feel on the inside. But as you say, that shouldn't pertain, then you shouldn't have to alter your entire physical body to suit that. Like if you're genuinely invested and interested in gender fluidity and people just being themselves, and let people just be themselves and stop trying to force them into this box that they're not in, then let this boy, have gender fluidity. Let this boy be like feminine things and leave him alone. Like they're the ones who are mixing these two concepts up, and of course in a very dangerous way.